The United States has been involved in the Second Civil War. In the past, a war also occurred around 1861 to 1865. The Civil War was triggered because of opinion differences between North and South America. Texas and California seceded and formed the Western Forces, while the Florida region formed its own alliance. This caused the territory of the United States to be attacked by various parties. As shown in the map, the blue part is full of the United States loyalists, led by the President of America, and the green area is Texas and California, and they united into the Western Forces, while the red area is Florida and the yellow part is filled by the separatists. America was really on the verge of collapse. The third-term president gave a speech about Western forces who got attacked from the loyalist countries, and he called it a great victory. This made the Western forces angry and intended to kill the president. A famous journalist, Lee Smith, watched the president's speech in his hotel room in New York City. While watching, Lee saw the bombing that occurred not far from where she was. However, she wasn't surprised because she often saw the war which had been going on for almost 4 years. The next day, Lee and her colleague, Joel, went to the location of the commotion in Brooklyn. People were seizing clean water provided by the American government. In the chaos, Lee saw an amateur photographer who was trying to take photos from close range. Of course, this was very dangerous, and sure enough, the girl was accidentally hit by an officer, so Lee immediately dragged her out. Lee then gave the girl a vest so that the officers and residents would know that she's a journalist. At the same time, they were shocked by a woman who ran towards the crowd, carrying an American flag. As soon as the woman entered the crowd, a sudden explosion occurred. The woman did a suicide bombing, ended up killing many people. However, instead of leaving, Lee came closer to the scene to take pictures of the victims. That night, Lee and Joel joined other journalists at a hotel. They met their mentor, Sammy. Sammy then asked Joel and Lee's next plans in covering this civil war. They said that tomorrow they would go to Washington, D.C. to interview the president directly. Their reckless plan made Sammy worried, because they would pass through a war zone in that country. Moreover, Sammy was not sure if the president wanted to be interviewed, because at this time, he thought the journalists were the enemy. Even though this plan was a bit crazy, Sammy begged them to take him because he wanted to go to the front line in Virginia. After the meeting was over, Lee decided to go home to his apartment. But when she was about to go, she met the amateur journalist Jessie. Here, Jessie thanked Lee because she had saved her. If only Lee hadn't dragged Jessie out, maybe she would have become a victim. Jessie also revealed that she was a big fan of Lee. That's the reason why she became a photographer, because she was inspired by Lee. The next day, when Lee was about to leave, she found that Jessie was coming with them. Lee immediately called Joel, asking him why he let Jessie come along with them, because it could endanger her life. Joel said that last night, Jessie asked him and Sammy to take her to Washington, D.C. Joel also said that Sammy really liked Jessie's spirit. After thinking it through carefully, Lee finally agreed to take Jessie along with them. The four of them then started traveling to Washington, D.C., which is about 500 miles from their current location. On the way, they passed hundreds of wrecked cars due to the scary Civil War. They then stopped at a checkpoint guarded by government soldiers, and they needed to show their identity as journalists. After being allowed to pass, they found the only gas station in operation, but the station was guarded by 3 fully armed residents. Because they almost ran out of fuel, they decided to fill up at the gas station. Joel and Lee bargaining with one of the residents who only wanted to be paid using Canadian dollars. While filling up petrol, Lee saw Jessie go behind the station, accompanied by one of the men. Lee then followed Jessie, and they were shocked by 2 men who were hanging alive. The man said that these 2 people were looters, and after that, the man suddenly gave Lee and Jessie chances to execute them. This shocked Jessie and made her afraid. Lee asked the man to release the 2 hanging men, but when Lee and the others continued their journey, Lee and Jessie argued because the man ended up killing the 2 men. Lee blamed Jessie, who went behind the gas station, which triggered this incident. After several hours of driving, Jessie complained because she didn't take a single photo. So when they crossed a dead city, Lee asked Joel to stop. Lee took Jessie to the location of the helicopter crash, asking her to take photos because Lee thought the helicopter crash photo would be very good in war reporting. That evening, they sat by the car and watched the gunfire in the distance, lighting up the night sky. Joel approached Jessie, who felt nervous because tomorrow they would be covering the war. Joel calmed her down, saying that everything would be fine as long as Jessie was with them. The next day, Lee, Joel, and Jessie covered the shootout that occurred between the separatist militia and the loyalists at the rooftop of a building. Gate on. They were in the separatists' group line, and one of them cornered behind a pillar. The separatist member threw a smoke bomb so his friend could run away. But unfortunately, it was in vain because his friend was shot and killed by bullets. After a long shootout, the separatist members finally succeeded in defeating the loyalist soldiers. They then entered the building to finish off and arrest the remaining soldiers. They captured 3 soldiers and executed them in the field. Shortly, Lee and her friends arrived at a refugee camp, full of children and women. They spent the night with those friendly refugees, and they were very different from the loyalists. The next day, they continued their journey to Washington, D.C. After traveling a very long time, they arrived at a clean small town. It seemed the war had not yet occurred there. They stopped at a clothes store, and Lee bought a simple dress. Jesse gave a compliment for Lee's appearance because Lee was very beautiful when wearing a dress. After buying clothes, Lee approached Sammy and said that this city reminded her of the situation before the Civil War, and there were no armed people in this city. But Sammy immediately denied, asking Lee to look up at the building. And sure enough, there were 2 armed men watching them. They kept on moving, and on the way, they saw a soldier who had just been shot. When Joel was about to pass by the corpse, suddenly his car was shot by someone he couldn't see. Because of that, Joel immediately hid his car behind a truck. Joel, Lee, and Jesse then got out of the car, met 2 snipers who were looking for a person who shot at them. The 2 soldiers explained that the shooter was a sniper and was hiding in an empty house. After spying for a long time, the 2 soldiers finally found the shooter's location, immediately shot him right in the head. After that, they continued their journey with Lee as the driver because Joel was tired. Lee suddenly saw a car speeding from behind, making them feel worried. Turns out, the passenger in the car was a journalist friend of Joel and Lee from China, Tony and Boy. In this unexpected meeting, Tony did a fun thing, moving into Joel's car. Jesse also wanted to move into Boy's car, but as soon as Jesse moved into his car, Boy sped up the car as if inviting Lee to race. But when Lee crossed the hill, she found that Boy's car had disappeared. Lee became angry with Tony, making her lose her concentration and almost hit a military truck. Lee returned to the main route, found Boy's car parked on the side of the road near a house. But strangely, Boy and Jesse were not in the car, so the 4 of them got out of the car to look for Boy and Jesse. How shocked they were when they saw Jesse and Boy being held hostage by 3 loyalist soldiers. Those 3 soldiers had killed people and thrown them away into a shallow grave. Realizing that Jesse was about to be executed, Lee, Joel, and Tony went over to them. Joel then told the leader, Couplet, that these 2 people were his colleagues as journalists. Couplet then asked what their purpose was here, and Joel admitted that he was going to cover new schools. However, Couplet didn't believe it and immediately shot Boy. This made them panic, including Tony, who immediately cried. Joel tried to persuade Couplet, saying that they were Americans. After asking Lee, Joel, and Jesse's citizenship, Couplet asked Tony's origin. As soon as Couplet heard that Tony was from China, he immediately shot Tony. Joel and Lee panicked, but when Couplet was about to shoot Joel, Sammy came and hit the 2 soldiers with his car. They immediately left the place while being shot at by a soldier. Sammy admitted that he could no longer drive anymore. Apparently, he was hit by 2 shots in the stomach. Joel and Lee moved Sammy to the back seat so he could rest. The next day, they finally arrived in Charlottesville in the Western Forces camp. There, they found that Sammy had died from loss of blood, and this made Joel cry. After they buried Sam, they met 2 British reporters, Ben and Anya. Anya explained to them that some of the loyalist generals had surrendered. This was the final point of the destruction of the United States. Even though the Western Forces troops were small, they had a lot of strong equipment for the war. They also put up their flag, which was almost similar to the American flag, except that it had 2 stars. That day, the WF troops started to transport their combat equipment because they would go to Washington, D.C. to attack the White House and arrest the president. Lee and her friends joined the WF. That evening, they arrived at the White House area, which was the point of the war zone. Those journalists covering the civil war that occurred between the WF against the loyal soldiers to their president. Lee did not take any photos at all in just stunned silence, as if she had no idea what was happening. The WF troops then deployed helicopters to destroy the loyalist defenses. Not only that, the WF troops also used tanks to break into the White House. After the gate was broken through, Joel received information from one of the WF soldiers that the arrest of the president had been canceled because they're going to kill the president instead. This information made Joel disappointed because his mission to interview the president failed and everything was in vain. At that moment, the WF soldiers saw the president about to escape using 3 cars. The WF soldiers called the president a coward and immediately shot at the 3 cars. None of the president's cars escaped and were immediately surrounded by bullets. However, Lee immediately realized if the president was still in the White House. Lee and the others went to the White House to interview the president, but unfortunately, they failed because the WF soldiers also came inside the building. The WF soldiers attacked the special agent who stated that the president was prepared to surrender, but on condition the WF soldiers had to secure him and take him to a neutral place. But the WF knew that this was a decoy, so they then shot the agent. Then it was followed by a shootout with the president's guards. The shootout was very dramatic. The guards fought to protect the president, but their effort was useless because the WF soldiers were much more experienced. When they were about to enter the president's room, Jesse was ridiculously standing in the middle of the corridor. Seeing this, Lee immediately protected Jesse and ended up being killed by being shot by the president's guard. Joel then entered the Oval Room, where the WF soldiers managed to arrest the president. Before the president was executed, Joel was filled with anger because he lost his friends. Then he asked for a quote from the president. The president begged Joel not to let the soldiers kill him, but Joel only said it was enough. Jesse got this opportunity to photograph the Western Forces soldiers who were shooting at the president.